I don't think that retailers in general are ready for the lightning speed that we are about to approach with AI.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Bluecore and Web Future Studio. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 115, and my guest is Chris Danton. Chris runs a digital agency called In Good Co., which helps brands identify where they're going and what the world will look like when they get there. Brands need to evolve, and through her writings and consultancy, Chris is providing thought leadership for her clients. Listen for her interesting perspective on how we will be shopping with the assistance of generative AI in the future. Before we get started, a quick thank you as always to Max Brandstetter of the Wild Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by Chris Danton. Chris is the Chief of Ideas and co-founder of In Good Co., a global brand consultancy. With a background in brand building, Chris and In Good Co. work with funded startups and Fortune 500 brands to ensure they stand out. She builds brands that actively grow and evolve without hitting pause. Her clients include Nike, Mars, Starbucks, Pinterest, Uniqlo, Psycho Bunny, Amass, 710 Labs, SLMD, Sex with Emily, Zappos, and more. Chris is also a keynote speaker and author of the highly successful Substack, Good Thinking, which is read by over 14,000 C-suite executives, venture capitalists, and creatives globally. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks for making the time. Look forward to hearing about all the great things that you've done and the writings that you have. One of the things we do on the show for the folks that have listened for a while, we love to get the first story, what your upbringing was and how it might have foreshadowed where you would wind up in your career.
I went to RISD, so I went to art school, architecture, interior architecture. And I always joke that architecture is one of those things that prepares you for everything. It's a bit like law. It takes you off on these paths that you don't even know about. So I call it like the sales school for creatives. And that really led me on the journey to where I am now. I went through experiential marketing. I've done a lot of trends forecasting. So I've really kind of put my foot in a few different places, which has led me to kind of where I am today, which is running a strategy agency and positioning brands.
And so when you think about, your week and you're working with clients and you're also doing a lot of writing, what's the inspiration for the writings that you come up with for Substack and wherever else your content appears?
That's a great question. So every week, I started this Substack a year ago. About exactly a year ago. And it came out of what I joked with my therapist was a consumption problem. I was reading so many newsletters, like just an incessant, I'm like I can't stop reading, I can't stop consuming things. And I began to kind of realize hey, while I'm waiting for what was happening as I was in client meetings and I'm dropping these gems that, I'm holding on to them. But I didn't have a way to proactively do that. I was waiting for the right time to drop this or that, but I had so much more in me. So the newsletter started as a way to kind of share that with the world. And honestly, at the beginning, it was really personal. It was just hey, I want to just have a way of getting this out and feel better about what I'm consuming. And for about 8 months, it was crickets. I didn't hear from one single reader. And then it was like the floodgates opened. I don't know if it's just consistency that kind of brings people out of the woodwork, but then it was just a flood of, hey, your newsletter is the only newsletter that I read anymore. I heard that from one of the biggest media companies out there. I won't name drop on here, But, I get a lot of emails like that lately where it says, hey, I'm kind of only reading your newsletter at this point. And what I'm doing is I'm really collecting, like I'm collecting all of these things that I'm reading all the time. But I think what I'm adding, which people have told me is kind of different, and we'll talk about it today, is I'm pattern matching across a lot of sectors. And I think a lot of people now, CMOs, CEOs, they get really siloed into their industry, whether it is they work in retail or F&B or whatever, CPG, and they're only looking at those things. And I'm looking at a lot of things and pulling together a lot of things that maybe they're not seeing, but like they really ought to be seeing, because I think that that's not the world that consumers live in. We don't live in silos. And when you can kind of start to see the patterns, it makes sense why maybe somebody in retail should be looking at healthcare and what's happening there, because there's a lot of stuff happening in healthcare right now that maybe wouldn't interest them on a daily basis, but it should.
It's very interesting that you describe it that way, because in retail, and I've spent most of my career in women's apparel, focused businesses, all too often brands will look at who their competition is, who they perceive their competition is, but then they forget, until they do surveying or actually talking to customers, you may not perceive that a particular company is your competition, but in fact your customer is shopping there. So the feature and the function and the capabilities that they may have, the processes and policies that those other brands might have, really are things you should be looking at, because your customers are seeing them too.
Exactly. And I think that's just not really how we're trained as marketers, or really what we're given the opportunity for. And I think that's really where the feedback I get on the newsletter is, hey, I don't actually have time to do all of this research and all of the reading that you're doing, but I'm finding it really valuable in the kind of executive. I have a lot of board members who sit on these great companies, and they're coming in and they're trying to give insight and direction on where things are going broadly, but they don't have time to get that kind of broad overview from every single place. So I think that's really the service that I provide. And yeah, it's been really fun. It's been a wild, wild year.
So let's go back a bit to, kind of earlier in your career. You point out that you got a job in trends forecast at what you called a large but relatively unknown agency. So what is a trends forecaster doing? I kind of see you sitting around with a crystal ball thinking about, what can I talk about?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it is a little bit like that. There's no crystal ball, but there's the internet. So luckily we all have access to that. At the time, we did not have Chat GPT or anything. So maybe even more exciting now. My job as the trends forecaster, I was working a lot for P&G, brands within P&G, sometimes in the men's division, sometimes in soap, like all over the place, really. And they were asking really particular questions, like, what's the future of sex for Gillette? Or what is the world of bar soap, and why do we care about it? And is there any place for it? Like, kind of big questions that you don't necessarily have like one particular answer to. And my job was to do a lot of deep research. We were researching into like what people are studying, what like edge consumer fringe behavior. I'm really looking for, again, those patterns. And I think that's a lot of my training comes from that experience, is like, you might not think that this one little thing that this person over here is doing relates to your brand, but I can assure you that that behavior is turning up in your brand, if that makes sense.
All right. And then as you were progressing, through time in that business and in some others, ultimately In Good Co. was formed. And what was the problem you felt like you were trying to solve? Was there a problem you were trying to solve in that space?
Yeah, I mean, there were two problems. One, I came from kind of bigger agency world where I just had been working at an agency that got sold to WPP. It was a big experiential agency. And we had gone through some enormous growth at that agency, from 20 people when I started to about 300 people when I left. And it was really like, it was like being on a rocket ship. And It was a bumpy road, as you can imagine. You learn a lot of great things and a lot of good things. So when we started Indigo, part of it from a selfish perspective was saying, hey, can we actually run an agency where people are happy? Because that's really hard to do at an agency. I think there's a lot of burnout. There's not a lot of female executives that can stick around sometimes because of the work environment. So we wanted to create an environment where we were thriving and that the people that we're working with were thriving too. So we had no office from the get-go. We had, so we were always remote well before that was a thing. We pick and choose the teams and we build the teams based on the client so that they actually enjoy working on the work, which, shocker of shocks, actually improves the work. So we did a lot of things there. And I think then from the client's perspective, what we're doing differently is we do a lot of repositioning of legacy brands often, but sometimes it'll be startups that are kind of saying, hey, we're seeing that we're growing really well, but we're also not really prepared for this next chapter. And my job is to tell them where they need to be going in order to be ready for that chapter, right? So whether or not it's a legacy brand, how do you evolve? And my philosophy on that is that brands should not go sit in a huddle for 2 years to rebrand. Like, I just don't think, I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but my view on it is that that's really unhelpful for brands these days. People are much more comfortable with watching brands evolve than ever before, and you're better off evolving project through project, initiative through initiative, but with a big vision, but you can do it as you're flying the plane, essentially.
Why do brands that you engage with, why do they feel like they need to reposition what they're doing?
We have a lot of brands come to us and they say, hey, we want to reach Gen Z. We need to be more relevant. Sometimes I'll actually pull away and say, hey, you actually have this audience here of silvers that you think is nothing. But reality is that this is a consumer that is really has a lot of money, has a lot of value, and you're not seeing that consumer has evolved. So that's a conversation I have sometimes. But they're often coming because they feel like they're not making the mark. Obviously, it normally comes down to money, and they're really not hitting where they need to be. But they don't necessarily know where in culture they really belong, if that makes sense. That tends to be the sort of the big question is like, who are we and who are we talking to? And they might have an idea, but sometimes it's actually they already have what they need, but they just don't see it.
I've been involved in a number of businesses that were catering to an older female consumer. And they felt like the business got older over time, but they weren't, by the nature of what they were selling, how they were selling, they didn't feel like they were bringing in younger consumers to kind of maintain a median age, a median demographic, whatever it was that they were looking at. And they aged and they felt like they were going to die literally if they didn't get
Mm-hmm.
younger. When you engage with a client, how do you help them reposition, but not walk away from the core group that they have built a business around?
I first educate them on where I think their consumer actually is. Because one of the things that I think that people have misunderstood about this older demographic is that they're the grandparents of yore, of days of old, like the knitting needles and permed hair and not getting out of their armchair. And the reality is that there are silvers out there who are entering peak fitness for the first time. They are moving, like the number one roommate right now is moms, like older moms. So families moving back in with their mom roommate. And there's a lot of things happening with these existing silver demographics that I think are way closer in reality to what Gen Z are interested in. And if you can actually update your view on this older consumer, you're going to naturally come closer to the Gen Z consumer. But you can't do that. You kind of need to do that first before you try to go after Gen Z, or you're going to alienate everybody in the process, because Gen Z is not going to think you're cool. And then this older consumer is going to feel like you just thought they were nothing and feel rejected. And that helps nobody.
And how do you help these brands establish the metrics, the measurement, the criterion for determining whether a repositioning is or was successful?
That's a great question. I mean, I think you can start to see it initially, like based on a very first project. So a very first campaign where you kind of change things, I think will immediately tell you if you're on the right track, if you're starting to see an uptick there. Pretty often, like what we try to do is say, like, what's the sort of not the lowest hanging fruit, but the lowest hanging fruit project that you could push the bar closer on. Take that, knock it out, and see if that knocks it, like, changes the direction of things. If people really start to respond to that, I think you're on the right track.
Leading retail brands are seeing 3-year customer retention rates that average 59%, while the industry average is only 22%. What makes the difference? It's a philosophy and framework called customer movement. Customer movement centers your strategy on customers rather than channels. It's the practice of understanding customer value and moving shoppers through the life cycle more often and more efficiently. From unknown visitors to known shoppers, from non-buyers to new buyers, from one-time buyers to repeat, and re-engaging those who threaten to slip through the cracks. Bluecore is the retail marketing technology behind customer movement, working with more than 400 leading retailers and D2C brands such as Gap, Neiman Marcus, Carhartt, and Tapestry. Learn more about customer movement and how to create a more active, profitable customer base at bluecore.com. You ultimately started on Substack, but maybe some people don't know, what is Substack?
That's a great question. Yeah, Substack is kind of growing, and if you're a marketer out there, I would start spending a lot of attention, I'd say, on this as an outlet. I think it's going to grow in the next year in a big way, especially with everything that's happening with TikTok. But Substack is essentially a place where it's evolving. So what it is right this second, what I think it will be in a year, I think are going to be quite different. But it started as a newsletter kind of platform. So it is newsletters that are going out in a traditional sort of email fashion, but Substack also has its own app and community where you can where you're sharing that. So it's not necessarily purely an email. It's not like a MailChimp or something, or Klaviyo, but it is sort of a system for it, but it has its own community. There's a lot of writers on there, a writer for basically every topic you could possibly imagine. Lots of marketing, lots of fashion, lots of beauty. I mean, it runs the gamut, sports, the whole 9 yards.
So you started on Substack, Good Thinking. What is Good Thinking?
Good thinking is a trends culture, and I joke, everything I'm sharing on Slack, but with a wider group. And it's a newsletter, a weekly newsletter. The Sunday edition is a comprehensive view of everything from culture, food and bev, tech, retail, travel, wellness and beauty. I mean, I have basically like 6 or 7, or maybe 7 or 9 different topics that I talk about every week. And it's sort of an overview. Like, if you need one thing to know what brands are doing across every single category, my goal is to get you that every single week.
Boy, that would make me tired just thinking about all that content that I needed to produce. But I've read through, as we've been introduced here by a mutual friend, I've been reading all of your information, and it's quite good. One of the things that I particularly was interested in was some of the predictions that you were making for 2025. And to your point about some of the specific groupings, buckets, call it what you like, maybe we'll run down a few of them. So silvers, how do you define silvers, and tell us about what you're thinking that group's going to be dealing with this year?
Silvers is my hope for a renaming of boomers. I think that the term boomer comes with a lot of baggage these days, and not most of it good. So I choose to call this demographic silvers because I think it's more complimentary. I think the reality, my prediction very broadly with silvers, is that I think finally this year we might see brands start to take an interest in this group of people. I think for a long time, again, like you were saying, it's essentially brands viewed it as like, oh, we're aging, and therefore we don't want to be part of it. I actually think that proactively going after a silver demographic will start happening with younger brands too, they have a lot of disposable income. Their behaviors are changing. They're no longer going into kind of this like docile retirement phase. They're going into a second chapter, fourth chapter. Like, I'm going hard. I'm going to start working out. I'm going to like take an active role in my grandchildren's life. I'm going to take another career. Like, it's really, really evolved. And I don't think that marketers have really necessarily, or brands have evolved their thinking around it. One example that I give a lot is in the auto industry. So auto, you think like to yourself, like, oh, we want to go after silvers. No, the average car buyer is now, new car buyer anyway, is 53 years old, right? So what is this 53-year-old doing? And you can start to think, oh, he wants a sports car. He's going through a midlife crisis, like all of your kind of traditional tropes, I suppose. And there are obviously those people. But like I said, actually now what we're seeing is intergenerational homes are growing faster than any other kind of home. So that might look like he's actually buying a minivan, but not like a dowdy old minivan that moms like in your head buy, but like a cool minivan that he can feel really like great about, or at least a sports car with 4 seats, you know? So I think it's starting to look at just, these are small changes, but I think that they are really, really important to wrap our heads around. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities for brands to actually thrive with this demographic.
And do you see that grouping of silvers, is it defined by an age or is it defined by something else?
I'm not a big fan of grouping people by age, because I think that, again, like everybody is kind of behaving differently. And I think within each of these kind of, like even Gen Z, to like broadly say you're going after Gen Z is absolutely insane today, right? So I refer to them as plus 55s, but I think then you could start to break it down into like, there are a lot of fitness oriented silvers. There are a lot of silvers that are very much into like very big into hobbies, traveling. Like there's all sorts of things. So I think you have to kind of break it down based on what industry and what category you're in. But there's a lot.
One of the other areas you talked about was alphas.
Yeah, on the other end of the spectrum. So alphas are, you know, kind of the younger cohort. So just 2025, we began betas. So we're basically going like tweens down to 1-year-olds, but obviously we're not trying to target and market to this group of people. But I think that what is happening that I think is really interesting, and my prediction is that I think we're going to start to see brands acknowledge what has been taken away from this group. In the days of old, when you were tweens, you would go to the mall. Like that was what we all did. Those spaces no longer really love to have alphas hanging out there by themselves. And I think that what we're beginning to see is that alphas are actually very interested in engaging with brands, the younger demographic than ever before. And what we're seeing is that parents actually want safe places that they can encourage their kids to go to. And I think we'll see brands start to build those spaces. One example that I have that is small, but I predict to be big soon is a place called Super Awesome in LA. It's a kids haircut place for tweens and below that feels cool, feels relevant, feels big. I could see something like Starbucks creating a tween alpha version of a store just for them, like somewhere that they could go and feel like it is actually, they are welcomed and wanted in these places.
That's so interesting because I think I recently read that, Starbucks, not necessarily for the alpha group, but they are doing more and more to make it less enticing for people to go to the store and hang out for an extended period of time. So often, you see people working from a Starbucks. That's not something that they seemingly want to have happen now.
Yes. I mean, what brands necessarily want and what I think they should do might not always be the same. But, I think of that as a little bit like the whole phenomenon of locking things up at CVS, right? We now know that that was absolute insanity and that it really doesn't work. And not inviting people into your store is not really a way to success, in my opinion. So I think if you start to create spaces where people feel safe, feel wanted, then they will start to behave the way that you think they should behave versus making them feel like they are other and then behaving as other.
One of the other groups that you've talked about is just retail in general. What are you thinking about in that space?
I've been thinking, I talk about retail a lot, and obviously I could bring up experiential as being a really big thing, but the piece that I decided to look at, obviously, for 2025 is how AI is going to affect all of the retailers. I don't think that retailers in general are ready for the lightning speed that we are about to approach with AI. I think that the way that we search for things, I think generative search will be like the norm within the next 2 years, easily. But what you need to be prepared for is that's going to totally change how people find your brand. And AI does not work the same way as traditional SEO and Google and all of those things. So you're going to have to change how you work. I think we could see the end of the website as we know it. I think your website will no longer be a place where you focus on selling. I think it will be a place where you focus on information and entertainment for your consumer and information for AI, and that it will become more like a vessel for this beautiful information, because you won't be going on people's websites to be convinced to actually buy anything. You're going to buy it directly within the platform of AI. So you'll be buying directly within ChatGPT. It's already happening. You'll buy it directly within Perplexity. They will tell you exactly why you need to buy it, and you will buy it right there. Similar to how people are starting to buy on TikTok directly, but this will be more organized. So you're going to tell it, hey, I need a couch. It's going to know what your style is. It's going to know what you like. It's going to kind of do all that filtering for you, and you're going to buy that couch in Perplexity and not on a website.
Wow, I guess if people saw me, they would see my mouth is wide open. I've got so many thoughts going on in my head about how that's going to work. Maybe we need another show about that. But let's assume I'm brand Mark and I'm selling men's apparel. So am I going to be advertising in your mind on ChatGPT or Perplexity or what?
I'm obviously not like the oracle of AI, but I am paying quite a close attention. And I think it's you're going to start to see brands working within the AI already. Like, for example, Instacart is already working within ChatGPT, right? So when you say like, hey, I want to do this recipe, Instacart can already add all of your ingredients for that recipe, knowing that you also bought butter, salt, sugar 2 weeks ago, and that your kid is gluten free. So it also won't add anything that has gluten in it. It's going to know all that. And that is the future. So I think what's interesting that you're going to have to deal with is how are you providing this information to the AI? And AI can look faster and more quickly across every single platform, like in an instant, right? Like, so what people have been doing where they're going, hey, I want to know what this dress looks like on somebody who is my size, who has my skin color, who, likes florals. It can do all of that for you very, very quickly. Only though, if the brands have done the service of giving it that information. And if they haven't, then it's going to serve up the information of some other brand that has. And I think that will be the very, very tricky thing. Is it's going to be a quantity game for a really long time. And that's why I think that brands that focus on really providing like these beautiful storytelling things, like AI really runs off trust. And so it's going to want to know that it can trust what it's giving you, and it's going to try to give you things based on those recommendations. It's going to be a really, really, really different time for retailers.
I love that one. Great. And then also food and beverage is an area that you like to talk about. And this was one, you had told me, and I'm interested in you sharing, moving towards a time of decadence, I think is the way you described it.
I am not the only person talking about this. There's so many people talking about this. There's a great Substack called 8Ball by this guy called Sean. And Sean's written about it. He's coined it boom boom, which I absolutely think is the best way to refer to it. But Fred Hart, who was in kind of my predictions newsletter, one of them, he refers to it as brands misbehaving. But I think that we've gone from kind of this, another person referred to it as we're moving from light mode into dark mode. I think what we're starting to see is that for a really long time, brands, F&B, but also generally like across the brand spectrum, we're playing it safe, right? Like to talk about smoking, goodness, never, to start to kind of go into this kind of darker, more decadent, more misbehaving mindset. And I think that we're starting to see brands do a lot of that. So I think just visually, like leather couches, whiskey, steak and cocktails, like it's going to be like everything maximalist. But I think it's still optimistic. So I think it's not dark mode and sad. It's dark mode, like decadence of, we're going to get a little bit of the 80s, but with less doom and gloom. So I think it's going to be a really fun time. I think that brands are going to start to be a little bit more edgy and start to play more, like be more human, be more misbehaving. So I think it'll be a really, really fun time to be a marketer in that perspective, because I think the shackles of sort of decency are about to come off.
That's really interesting. So thanks for sharing those thoughts. And we'll have to have you back next year to take a look and see how those four areas have progressed and whether or not you were right or not, air quotes around right, because obviously everything is just about degrees, I imagine. Are you an online retailer or brand looking to enhance your product imagery? Look no further than Web Future Studio, your trusted partner for professional image editing services tailored to your needs. At Web Future Studio, we combine expert image editing with a personalized customer approach. We understand the fast-paced nature of e-commerce, which is why we pride ourselves on delivering top-quality images while meeting tight deadlines. Our team is dedicated to bringing value to your brand by perfecting your visuals, from regular product photos to compelling marketing images that captivate your audience. What sets us apart is our commitment to customization. We offer optimized and tailored cost structures that suit your specific needs and budget, ensuring you receive the best service without unnecessary costs. Join the many U.S.-based clients who have trusted us to refine their product images and boost their online presence. Ready to make your images stand out? Contact Web Future Studio today to discuss how we can bring your vision to life. Visit webfuturestudio.com to get started. We're at the end of the show. We do a 2-minute drill, 7 questions, 1-word answer. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. A brand that you admire or that inspires you?
Fishwife.
Fishwife. Okay.
It's a tin fish brand. They're female run, but they are going to be very, very big, and you can already see them in Whole Foods. They're doing a lot of very cool stuff and have been growing year by year, and I think they're really a fun brand to watch.
Okay. Favorite app on your phone?
Slack.
Last website other than Amazon that you shopped from?
IKEA.
Something that you're not good at but wish that you were?
Spotting typos.
A charitable organization that you're passionate about?
Baby to baby.
If you had one superpower, what would it be?
Teleportation.
Other than family, what's your most prized possession?
My art collection.
And so, you're out there on social media. What's the best place for people to connect with you if they should like to do that?
Well, obviously follow me on Substack, Good Thinking. I'm also writing all the time on LinkedIn, especially about silvers, if that interests you. So yeah, that's another good place to find me.
Fantastic. I really enjoyed meeting you, Chris, and now having been exposed to all of your writings, really interesting stuff. I've made a few notes for myself on things that I'm going to need to be paying attention to. So thanks for doing that. So good to meet you. You have a great day. Perhaps we'll talk again, like I said, next year and see how 2025 shaped up.
Same to you. This was super fun. Thank you for having me.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Chris Danton for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, many people already are familiar with Substack, but if you're not, check it out. Substack is a subscription-based platform that lets writers publish newsletters, podcasts, and other content. It also helps creators manage subscriptions and earn money from their content. The array of content that is available is unlimited and allows writers to connect with their audiences. Check it out if you have not already done so. And number two, all brands have competition, but not all brands fully understand who they're competing with. Many brands tend to focus only on others that sell their product categories or their price points, but you cannot only focus on that. Focus on the end consumer and where they spend their money. You might be a high-end fashion brand, but your customer might also be spending at more moderate brands to fill out another part of their closet. Speak to your customer and let them tell you who you're competing with for their disposable dollars. And number three, generative AI. There's not a day that goes by where you're not using it or hearing about it. Chris had an interesting take on things. She described a scenario where we'll all be shopping in tools like ChatGPT and Perplexity as opposed to a brand's website. She envisions the day where the website is informational only and helps to power what you're fed through generative AI. So just when you thought you had figured out shopping online, it could be heading for some big changes. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, the devil is in the details.